Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Simon Timpley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Welcome to edition 62 of the Food Safety Fridays webinar programme. Today we've got a new speaker again, Dr. Joanne Taylor, who's the Training and Research Director at TSI. And today we're going to be talking about culture. Can anybody sum up what culture is in a sentence? It's not easy to define what it is, and also what is excellent culture, culture excellence. So today's webinar is about culture excellence and also presenting a model for measuring culture, measuring and monitoring culture. So we'll be going over to Dr. Joanne shortly just to introduce ourselves. Just to say, today's webinar is being recorded as ever, and we follow up with an email afterwards with the slides, a copy of the slides, the webinar recording, and your certificate of attendance. So don't worry if you miss a little bit today, or you have to get called away to do some work or do an audit or have an unannounced audit maybe. Don't worry, it's being recorded. As you know, we're live streaming. What can go wrong will go wrong. We're relying on my internet connection, Joe's internet connection, and all your internet connections all over the world. So likely it won't go perfect, but let's hope it goes as well as possible. As you know, Food Safety Fridays are sponsored by Trace Analytics, Safe Food 360, Metla Toledo, and AIB. And the kind sponsors help to bring you this free education every week, along with the presenters, of course. Are you there, Joe? Can you say hello for a minute? Switch your webcam on. Hello from Russia, Natalie. Are you there, Joe? Yes.
I am. Hi. Yeah. Hi.
Welcome to Food Safety Fridays, Joe. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thanks for the invite to be here, and hello to everybody. It looks like we have an exciting global gathering today.
Yes, it always is, from all over the world. It's really amazing, really. And lots of people say in their neck of the woods, often training of any sort isn't available. So to do this is fantastic. To get bite-sized bits of education each week is great. And where are you calling in from today, Joanne?
I am calling in from Dubai. It is 7 o'clock in the evening, so the city lights are on and it's dark outside. As you can see, we've got quite a few time zones there. So good morning, evening and afternoon to everybody that's listening in.
Okay, I'm just going to talk about next week with the audience. If you can get your sort of slides ready. Don't put them up yet, but just give me a moment. I'll let you know, Joe. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, in the sidebar, we haven't got a Food Safety Fridays next week, boo-hoo. But what we have got, we've got a 4-hour online training course with Tony Connor, practical internal auditor training. And that's great. You get some documents, some templates, you get some instruction on practical application of audit. So whether you're developing an internal audit program, or you want to improve, some pointers to improve your internal audit program or your internal audit skills, team, whatever, just click the button, find out more, and you can read all about it there. So, but we will be back the week after with Food Safety Fridays. I can't remember the topic just off the top of my head, but you'll hear by email. So, Joe, if you want to get your slides ready now, I'll be back for the Q&A later with Joe, and we'll be having some polls throughout. So, hope you'll engage with them, and I'll be seeing you in a little while. So it's over to you now, Joe, if you're ready.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah.
Okay. I think the slides are coming. Yes. There we go. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you. So hello, everybody, and nice to speak to you all. Today's session is a short session, and I'll be looking at the topic of food safety and quality culture, and looking at particularly what is culture excellence, how do you know if you have it, and how can it be assessed within a food company. So a brief overview of the content: what is culture, how is it embedded, and what is culture excellence. We'll look at the 4 main areas within an organization that need to be targeted in order to achieve food safety and quality culture excellence. We'll look at the assessment methods that we're using And I'll show you an example of some of the results that can come out of that and the type of impact that it can have on a company when they're aware of where their strengths and weaknesses are. So to get started, I have a quick question for you before we begin talking about the subject area in more detail. And the quick question will have an opportunity for you to respond. The question is, do you believe at the current time you have a strong food safety and quality culture at your site? And we have yes, partly, no, or I don't know. So if you feel very strongly that you do, yes. If you feel very strongly that you don't, no. If you think that maybe you are partly there, then you can answer partly. And if at the current time you're just not sure, then you can respond that you don't know.
Okay, yeah, I've loaded that in the sidebar and we're getting the answers in. The majority, let's say around, settling down around 58% are saying partly,
Okay.
28% yes, 11% no, and 4% I don't know. So the majority actually partly, with quite a lot, 28% yes, believe they've got a strong food safety and quality culture. Is that
Fantastic.
promising, Joe? Is that promising?
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think that the reason we perhaps have quite a small amount of people saying I don't know is that even if you're not an expert in food safety and quality culture, usually when you work in a site, particularly in a managerial role where you have access to a lot of the information and you see a lot of what people are doing, you do get quite a strong feeling for how you're going in relation to food safety and quality culture. And usually when we ask this question, we get a lot of yeses. And if we delve a little bit deeper, people will often say partly, perhaps they are aware that they're not quite perfect, but they do feel overall usually quite positive about it. So yeah, fantastic. Thank you for responding to that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you the same question at the end of my presentation, and I'm going to see if any of those numbers change.
Okay, we'll write those down then. All right. Okay, Joe, you can move on.
Fantastic. So I think quite important before I start talking in any more detail is just to establish what I mean when I talk about culture, and so that to give you an idea of the context within which I'm talking. So when we talk about food safety and quality culture, what we're looking at is those prevailing or dominant attitudes and behaviors that are happening within an organization related to food safety and quality, and particularly that are taught to employees. So when a new employee starts, this is how they get an idea for the way that they're meant to think and behave in relation to food safety. There are many different definitions of culture. There are many definitions of food safety and quality culture, but what almost all of them will have in common, because this is essentially the fundamentals of culture, are that they are shared. So this is something that happens when groups of people get together and they start to influence each other. They're also always going to be learned. You don't have an innate culture. Culture is something that you learn, whether you learn it from your community or whether you learn it from your organization. Normally, we are talking about the way people think and the way they behave. So in every definition of culture, you'll usually hear reference to attitudes, practices, perhaps values, shared groups of people starting to influence each other in how they think about safety and quality. And the reason that I've added the terms directly and indirectly is because it's really to focus on the fact that cultural messages are abounding within an organization constantly. And it's not just the direct messages that people are giving that will influence the food safety and quality culture. It's often those indirect messages that are having an even greater effect, and especially where we can get a conflict between the direct and the indirect messages. So this is something I'll pull up on a little bit more as I go through the next few slides. So how is culture embedded? You, I'm sure, for the people that are listening in today, probably have a managerial role within the food industry, a role in which you influence other people, whether you're a top senior manager or a supervisor or group manager. If you have influence over other people in an organization, perhaps even a trainer or an auditor, you could think of yourself as a food safety and quality leader, someone that influences others. And one of the primary ways that culture is embedded within an organization is through what the leaders pay attention to and what they do with information that they have. So if we just look briefly at these 4 elements of primary embedding, we can see leader focus. What do leaders talk about? What do they pay attention to? What do they measure? So if you're measuring something, you are communicating to people within the company, this is something that's important. And this is why often when we start working with organizations who measure their food safety and quality culture, there's a very strong message about that being something important to those leaders. Interestingly, leader reactions can play a really crucial role. If there's an incident, if there is a problem, a corrective action required, anything that goes on in the company, the way the leaders react to it sends a really strong message throughout the organization in terms of what's important to that leader. And also, in a perhaps more deliberate way, how that leader hires, how they promote, how they recognize and reward, even how they fire. Again, it sends a really strong message, and it embeds in those messages in relation to what is food safety and quality like at this organization. And finally, within the primary mechanisms, there's a lot about how a leader teaches, trains and coaches others within the organization and how they set up those kind of programs. In terms of leader focus, you can also consider here budget. So how a leader will allocate their budget will also give a really strong message. These categories are adapted from work in organizational culture from a gentleman called Shine. There's a fantastic textbook published in 2010 about organizational culture that may not be related to food safety and quality, but for those of you with an interest, I would very much recommend that you read it because it goes into a lot more detail. Shine identifies that in addition to these primary mechanisms of embedding culture, there are supporting or secondary mechanisms at play as well. And if we look at what those secondary mechanisms are, one of them is the systems that are in place. So the food safety management system, the HACCP system, the quality system, these don't on their own direct the culture. We can't just put a system in and expect that everything around it is going to change. But when we have the things that the leaders are paying attention to and we support that with a really solid system, then yes, it makes a difference and it helps us to embed a positive and a strong food safety and quality culture. Also, the way the premises is set up, the facilities, the way the organization is structured, who are the technical teams reporting to, how does that work? We also have secondary mechanisms from the formal statements that are made, the vision poster that's on the wall, the values that are communicated across the organization. And finally, the rituals and the stories, the things that people talk about in the company, things that people remember, a time that perhaps something went wrong and people are still talking about it, or a time perhaps that something really great happened and the stories form around it and they create this impression and this message that gets promoted to people everywhere. And the rituals that people get into, the habits, again, they are important secondary mechanisms for embedding culture. So when you leaders are thinking about how am I impacting the culture of my organization, you're doing it all the time, whether you're aware of it or not aware of it, and whether it's deliberate or not. It's something that's happening continuously. And one of the problems with culture is that perhaps it's one of those perhaps unprecedented events with a non-deliberate reaction that can really show everybody the importance or not of something within the company. And it might not always be in line with what's said formally when everything's calm and organized and you're saying, yes, food safety and quality is number one. So something to think about, I hope, when you think about the impact that you're having on your organization's culture. In terms of trying to find out what is the organization's culture, you get a feeling when you work in a company. You start to get the impression, perhaps even quite soon after working there, one organization will feel quite different to another in relation to how food safety and quality are understood, how they're valued and how they're operated. But when we come to thinking about measuring it, it's very difficult to put a quantitative and a tangible measure on it. When I first started working in the psychological, the social science field in food safety, and this is more than 15 years ago, people thought I was crazy to be talking about thoughts and feelings. And, you know, it was all about hard data and science and technical information. But I think now we've come to a place in the food industry where people are really interested and engaged with understanding the more softer side of food safety management. But it's very difficult because unlike a customer complaint or some audit data or tracking a number of incidents or corrective actions, when you think about how people feel and these primary mechanisms that are taking place, they're harder to directly measure. And if you think about the culture of an organization like an iceberg, when you walk into a company for the first time, particularly as a visitor, an inspector, or an auditor, what you see is, of course, just the tip of that iceberg. And if you have a short amount of time in a company, and this is why the job of inspection and auditing is so incredibly challenging, you're trying to gather information from what you can see to be able to give you more knowledge about what you can't see. If we look at how the theory constructs this, we look at 3 different levels of organizational culture. And at the top, we talk about artifacts. So the artifacts are what you see. You walk into a company and you can see how clean it is. You can see the posters on the wall. You can see how people are behaving. You're not looking at the culture as a tangible thing, but you're looking at the output and the artifacts of that culture. Spending some time in the organization and listening to what people are saying during meetings, during training, and you start to understand the values that are spoken at that company. It's not something directly visible, it's something we need to listen to get an idea of. And this tells us in the way that people talk, in the way they structure their meetings, where is food safety and quality within that? Are there direct reward schemes that are available that people talk about for food safety and quality? And we can start to get more of an idea. The hardest level to assess, and something that makes culture very challenging to measure and to really fully understand, is that there are underlying values as well. And many people in the organization will have their own priorities and their own issues and their own underlying values. And these aren't always necessarily directly in line with the spoken values. And where we get conflict here, this can cause problems in food safety and quality culture. So you might say to your employees, look, food safety is the most important thing, so is quality, and you might promote that through meetings, you might promote that through training. But if a manager gives an operator 10 jobs to do and 9 of them are nothing to do with food safety and quality, and that operator starts to get the idea that, well, actually, if I don't complete these other 9, that's what I'm going to get disciplined on, that's what's going to get me in trouble, then the spoken value and the underlying value are inherently in conflict there. And it can create problems in the organization. And especially when things go wrong, when there's a problem or when there's a particularly busy day or something unpredicted happens, that's when those underlying values can have a greater impact than we expect. So it's something that we know is really important to learn about, and it's also something that we know is actually really quite challenging. Now, when we first started working in culture and food safety culture particularly, we were thinking very much about how can we make this subject more tangible? How can we make it something that's a little bit more concrete, not just this idea of thoughts and feelings and this kind of fluffy, softer side of food safety? And one of the things that was very important for us was to create a structure using simple terminology that within the industry would resonate and that would enable people to understand it in the context of their jobs and their work. And the structure that we developed was built around 4 categories of purpose, process, proactivity, and people. And I'm going to talk through these in a little bit of detail to give you an idea of what we mean. So first of all, one of the areas that's really important in relation to food safety and quality culture are, of course, the people working in the organization. And some of my research that I've been doing over the last 15 or more years is interviewing people and finding out how they feel about food safety and what are the blocks, what are the issues that can affect them in their jobs and from achieving the standards that we need them to achieve. One of them is empowerment. So when we think of, for example, HACCP, we actually do think of empowerment as a core element of the system, giving people at a CCP that authority to take control when it's needed, to enact corrective action when there's a CCP breach. So empowerment is this really core part of our regular food safety management speech, but how well that works can have a really important effect on the culture of the organization. do people really feel trusted and valued enough? And do they have the authority to take a decision when they need to, when there's something that needs to be done? Also within people, of course, we talk about training and communication. So not just is there food safety training or is there quality training, but how effective is it? Is it specific? Does it impact on behavior? Does it match the requirements of the person that was having it? And we can't just think of training as something that happens on a very infrequent basis. So we might have an annual training program, for example, but we need to think about that regular communication that fills in the gaps and keeps people continually updated and keeps safety and quality continually top of mind. So workshops, meetings, social media, there's so many ways that communication needs to be utilized throughout the organization to enable that to happen. And of course, is the communication appropriate for the people that are being communicated with? Reward is a key one. So it's very nice to think that everybody does everything they need to for the good of the good of the company. And of course, most people do want to do a good job, but all human beings need some form of recognition and reward to really motivate them to put in the real extra effort that's required to make sure things are done properly all the time. So within companies, there needs to be really clear recognition and reward schemes and processes that can facilitate food safety and quality. And of course, they need to be fair, they need to be transparent, they need to be consistent. Finally, teamwork. And again, we think about HACCP and we think about, well, of course, we have teams as part of that. And that's a really key part of food safety and indeed quality. But on a broader level, do people feel that they're working as a team? Do they feel that it's a shared responsibility for food safety? Are there any issues around blame or hiding things that have gone wrong? Because all of this can, of course, have that big impact. So the people part is really, as I'm sure you can tell instantly, very, very important. When we look at process, the second category, so moving away from the people working in the organization and looking at the actual processes at play and how they support food safety and quality. So first of all, management control. How things are balanced in relation to workload, levels of discipline, how those decisions are made and how they are enacted has a really crucial role. Managers actually know what's going on in their company and understand how the processes work or maybe don't work at all times. Different departments being coordinated, and especially as you get larger organizations, you can almost, well, you do actually in some cases, you can create subcultures within a very large organization with different priorities and different ideas. And sometimes this is a very natural thing because in an organization, you might have a technical team whose first priority is safety. And then we might have another team within the organization whose first target is productivity, getting the product out of the door, keeping the customers happy. And then we might have another team who has a slightly different priority again, perhaps in terms of budget and other things. So the coordination of those food safety and quality priorities and operations is absolutely crucial. The systems themselves, I've mentioned HACCP a few times. I was a teacher in HACCP at the University of Salford for 10 years, and I think HACCP is a wonderful way to organize your life and your business. But of course, it can also be something that's a burden. It can also be something that's too complex for people to fully understand. It can be something that just creates too many documents and records and leaves people feeling a little bit put off. So again, the systems, they need to both be very accurate and valid and match what they need to do, but they also need to be practical and user-friendly and actually support the people in the organization rather than making their life more difficult. Finally, within process, we have consistency, and this is a common question that often comes up at a time of an audit. So many companies I know will say, don't speak to me this week, I'm preparing for an audit next week, which of course we can all have perhaps a little bit of a suspicion of in that case, because really this food safety and quality standards and systems should be running the same way all the time and not changing when there's an audit or a visit coming in from the outside, because that consistency of their application is really crucial. Purpose. So this is a slightly more broader organizational topic. So we're moving up a level and looking at the top level down, the purpose of the organization. And fundamentally, how much is food safety and quality a core part of the purpose of that organisation? This relates in part to the vision for the organisation incorporating safety and quality. So when the senior managers are thinking of their long-term vision, how much is food safety and quality a part of that? And also how much is that then communicated out to everybody in the company? Visions are great, but as all of you managers know, there needs to be strategies there to match those visions and to give employees within the company confidence that when a manager says this is our top priority for the next 5 years, this is what we plan to do, that they can also then back it up and say, and this is how we're going to do it, and build confidence and clarity amongst their workforce. On a smaller day-to-day, week-to-week level, there also, of course, needs to be targets that relate to both safety and quality. And again, these need to be clearly communicated and managed and achieved. Finally, in this section, we have values, and regardless of how things might change in relation to strategy and vision, the values are those underlying priorities across the organisation, and what we need to know is how much the food safety and quality really are a part of them and how much that's understood all the way throughout the organisation. The fourth area, so by now I hope you're thinking about which of these you're strong at and which of these you're perhaps weaker at, but the final section that we look at is in proactivity. As we know, the food industry doesn't stay still. There are new developments, there are new laws, there are outbreaks, there are new hazards. So in a continually changing environment, the amount that an organisation can be proactive in relation to food safety and quality is as important as how they manage that day to day. And within proactivity, we consider external awareness. So within your food company, do you have that awareness of what's going on outside, other standards in the industry, new developments, what's happening outside the four walls? And within this category, we look at innovation and change. So it's not just about how things are right now, but it's also about the ability to change if necessary and being able to innovate when it actually is of benefit to safety and quality. Risk is a crucial one here. Risk doesn't stay the same. It's one of those annoying parts of food safety management whereby we've analysed our risks beautifully, but things change. Things change over time. Things change because of all the issues that we talked about earlier. And risk is also something that's particularly hard to understand within an organisation. So having that ability to think of not just a list of 20 hazards, but actually be able to understand which are more important than others and which should be prioritised can be really, really challenging, especially in food safety. And finally, the final one of the 16 is learning, organisational learning. So the training in the people category is one thing, but when we think of the organisation, how does it learn? So if in your organisation you have an incident and then you have that incident happening again, there has to be that question of why are we not learning from it? If there's a corrective action and there's another one, even if it's in a different site or a different country, that organisational learning might be something to consider, something that's missing in the middle. So as things happen and change and mistakes are made and incidents occur, that's all great, that's all fine, because within a well-managed system, they will be corrected and dealt with. But then the next stage is allowing the organisation to actually improve as a result of that happening and to move forward and be stronger. So hopefully, after listening to those 4 categories and the 16 dimensions that come from that, you can get quite a good understanding of what we mean when we talk about food safety and quality culture excellence. What we're talking about is an organisation that has a strong grip on each of these 4 areas and the categories within them, and has that understanding of the broader realm of activity that's necessary to get a really strong food safety and quality culture. I mentioned that I used to teach HACCP, and for many years I thought if you have a great HACCP system, you've got a great food safety culture. And it took me years of research and working within the industry to see, well, actually, no, you can have a great system, but it doesn't mean you have a great culture. And also as a teacher, I used to think, well, surely if we just give great training and we give the best training in the world, then we can affect culture change. But of course, it takes so much more than training. So we're left with a situation in which training and systems are really just 2 of these 16 dimensions. And if an organization can look more broadly at all the different things that could be affecting the food safety and quality standards in their company, then we believe they can work at getting a stronger culture. So I have a question for you that I would like you to answer now. You've heard me talk about these 4 categories in a little bit of detail, and what I'd really like to know is, from the group that we have listening now, which of these P's do you think are strongest? And then I will also ask you which you think are the weakest. So, first of all, do you think you are strongest in your sites at the people side, the process side, the purpose side, or the proactivity side?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I've loaded that poll in the sidebar. Which of the 4 P's is the strongest at your site? People, process, purpose, or proactivity? And okay, so process is coming out top at the moment, Joe, with 48%, and then people 35%, and followed by purpose about 17%, and then finally proactivity just 7%.
Okay, so again, we tend to see quite a similar pattern. We've probably got a little bit of an extra high score on process here compared to what I've seen previously. But normally what we see is that the people and the process side is often what people have focused on the most. So they've focused in very much on training, communication, systems, and that's something that organizations often focus on and think if we get that right, then we'll get this culture that we're looking for. Also, organizations that perhaps not necessarily just in relation to their safety and quality, but more broadly, organizations and especially larger ones will often focus in on their vision and their values and getting that side right. But it doesn't always filter through. So we do often see companies that have those formal statements, which we heard in the beginning is really just a secondary embedding mechanism, but they haven't got them effectively filtered all the way through the organization, which is why we often see purpose coming a little bit lower. And in proactivity, this often does come out as the lowest, so it's perhaps not a surprise here that it's come out as the lowest, because it's one of the more challenging areas, and it's also one of the things that we don't perhaps necessarily immediately think of when we think of improving our culture. We often think of what we've got in front of us and how we can utilize that, perhaps rather than thinking of what we could predict and anticipate on what goes on outside of the company in addition to internally. So that's really interesting. Thank you for doing that. And what I'd like to know now, and we should see the opposite happen, let's see, but you never know, it might be a little bit different. Can you let me know what you think the weakest one of the 4 is? So we've looked at, on an individual basis, which ones you think you are stronger at, and can we now look at which of those 4 you think is the weakest?
Okay, again, I've loaded that poll with 4 P's. The weakest at your site: people, process, purpose, or proactivity. And yeah, proactivity is coming out top around 60%, and then people 25%, purpose and process quite similar, purpose 11% and process 8%.
Okay, so there we go. Well, that's very interesting because we've got proactivity has clearly come up as the lowest of the 4. Not only is it the lowest of the strongest, but it's the highest of the weakest. But interestingly, we can see that people is more of a mixed one. So there are some of you who feel that this is actually your strongest, and then there are others of you that feel this is the weakest. So yeah, that's an interesting split actually. We can see there that perhaps in the people category, although that's often an area of focus, it might be that that's the area that by focusing on it, you can see when you have problems in that area, which is why it's coming up in both the answer to both of those questions. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we assess culture. I've mentioned that it's something very challenging to assess, and I've mentioned that it's historically been something that when you look at that iceberg model, we've often focused on the artifacts and we've struggled with actually managing to get that deeper assessment. And when I started my research in the area, I did this through a combination of observation and interview. So I would go into sites and I would look at what they had in terms of their systems, look at what they had in terms of their training and other documents, and I would also interview people and talk to them in depth. So that gave this combination of both the more underlying values and then the artifacts as well. But when we look at people more broadly and the industry more broadly, people were asking us for something that was quicker and more cost effective. So they said, we don't have time to invite somebody in to spend time interviewing all of the different staff. We need something quicker and easier. So over the last few years, and in collaboration with my team, we've developed an online assessment that uses the output from the interviews that we did, but it turns it into an online quantitative methodology. So the type of questions that we have to ask to get to the bottom of the organization's culture are a combination of facts, opinions, and rankings. So it's not as simple as just, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Because we're actually trying to get beneath the spoken values, so the underlying values. And we're also trying to get to the honest interpretation of people within the company. So we ask this combination of how many times things happen or when things happen. We look at how they feel about certain issues. And we also force them to actually choose different options where you can't just say everything is great. You have to have a ranking of which is the best or which is the worst. We use an online assessment which is done by computer, tablet or phone, so that we can get to large numbers of people over a short space of time. And we found that the quickest we could get a cultural assessment completed in terms of the development of a survey was 15 minutes. So for us, this was the sweet spot between getting enough data in that we could get an idea of the culture, but not being too long that people would actually give up and stop taking the survey. We've certainly found that if you go too much past 15 minutes, people will switch off. But if you do too much less than that, then you just don't get enough information back. So that's always a challenging thing for those of you that are involved in assessing your culture. Obviously, within the food industry, we have a lot of different nationalities. We have a lot of languages spoken. So also the survey needed to be translated into many languages. And as I mentioned, the whole process of development has been more than 15 years. This wasn't a simple thing to do. This was a complex, difficult, and time-consuming thing, because the subject matter is so broad. And it's something that's ongoing. We certainly don't think, well, now we're there, we've finished, we're not going to continue. I think this will be an infinitely long research and development process. So having the assessment, I'm going to show you a little bit of the data that can come back from it so that you get an idea of how we assess organizational food safety and quality culture and the kind of thing that a company can then do in response. The first example I'm going to give you is the example of the BRC voluntary module. So for those of you that have seen this, you will know a little bit about it already. For those of you that are new to this, the BRC, we partnered with them just over a year ago now so that they could offer a light version of the Culture Excellence Programme that would be very cost effective at a site-by-site level, and it could be taken as part of the BRC food safety audit. So it's a voluntary module and it can be added on. What the company gets in response to doing this, we provide the online survey. The auditor also answers a few extra questions on their interpretations of culture, and those sources of information are looked at to give the company information back on where they stand, specifically in relation to their food safety culture. You can see a small picture on the screen. It shows you that you get numbers for the total, numbers for the 4 Ps that I talked about, and also numbers against those 16 criteria. We make it very simple. It's out of 100. And to give people an idea of where they stand, when we designed the survey, we set the industry norm to 60. So if somebody is sitting in the middle or they're not sure how to answer, or the common trend that people will make is they will normally just hit this 60 mark. It also is the midpoint for any facts or rankings that we provided. So that's how we got our industry norm. when companies get higher or lower than that, it then gives them that immediate idea about whether that's something that people are performing well at, whether they're satisfied with it, whether they're performing badly or dissatisfied. Another piece of data that we've tracked, and we've had about 20,000 responses so far to the Culture Excellence Survey. We track the industry average as a number that moves depending on who's taking the survey. And the current industry average, which has varied over the year between 65 and 70, is currently sitting at 70. So what that means is that of the companies who have joined the program so far, we do have 10 points over the norm that was set. And I think that's partly because the companies that are most interested in culture are the ones that perhaps have that slightly stronger culture to start with. Because as we know, leaders who pay attention to food safety culture in this way, leaders who measure it, leaders who show that they're very interested in it, that is a sign of the way that the culture has been embedded. So when a company gets these numbers, what do they need to do? They can't just say, very nice, I've got a nice number, it's higher than the norm, I'm going to stop there. What the company needs to do is, first of all, compare the categories. Do they have a similar number for people, process, purpose, and proactivity? Or is there something that is dropping below the others? If there's something that's dropping below, that gives them an idea that that's something they need to pay attention to. If the numbers are reasonably similar, the next step is to look at the dimension scores. Which are the low ones? Is there something that's dropping below everything else and pulling down the overall score? Is there something that's sitting much higher, perhaps, that they could learn from? When they get these numbers, they need to go back to their sites and they need to discuss them. If they have a low number, they need to start thinking about why that might be the case and talk to people at the site and examine the issue further in order to create a continual improvement plan. The plan would focus on the low areas and how to improve them, but what we would also recommend is that the plan incorporates maintenance ideas for those higher scoring items as well. If they're doing well, is it because of something that's been going on for a long time, or is it perhaps something new that's happened? And if it's something new, then that needs a mechanism for further embedding it and maintaining it over time. Communication is really important. So you've asked many people at a site to take this survey. They've given 15 minutes of their time. It's quite important for people to feel that their views have been heard. So when the company does come up with a continual improvement plan, it's really important that that is communicated back to the site at the level of detail that's appropriate to give people that confidence. What we tend to see is in year 2, we're more likely to get a higher response rate because people understand that it was worthwhile doing it in year 1. And finally, this is something that can be added to the annual audit. When the BRC audit is taken place, this voluntary module can simply be added on, and it's then taken every year. So the company can keep an eye on their numbers. Are things improving in line with their continual improvement plan? Are other things perhaps dropping that they didn't expect to drop? It just allows them another metric through which they can keep their eye on how food safety and quality are performing at the site. And it's really great when this can be used in conjunction with other data that they generate, that hard data that we talked about earlier. So that's one example. For those of you that I've noticed a few people asking how exactly you might get involved in this. So for those of you that are interested in doing the voluntary module, you simply arrange an assessment at one of your sites or multiple sites and add it to the BRC food safety audit. It can also be done separately. You get the report, you take the steps that I've identified, and you utilize that for continual improvement. At the end of this presentation, I'll provide the contact details of BRC. So if any of you have any specific questions about how that works, you can follow up with them. Okay, one more example before we finish. I want to show you what can happen when you have access to the next level of data. So we have been working with Camden BRI for a couple of years now on a program that looks at food safety and quality culture, and we have an online platform that organizations can access their data from and look at it in the next level of detail. So this can be done separately from the BRC program, or alternatively, for people using the BRC voluntary module, they can also opt to take an upgrade to get access to this next level of data. The same process applies. You take the survey, you encourage as many people at the site as possible to take the survey, and then you get access to those numbers. You would have to communicate, discuss, develop a continual improvement plan, track the progress. So all those same steps apply. One of the main differences here, though, is that with access to the raw data and this online platform, you can get that next level of information about what might be going on at the site in relation to your problems and what you could then do more specifically about them. And what you can also do is you can filter. So if you have multiple sites getting data, the online platform is really nice because you can click all your sites in one region or all your sites in another. You can focus perhaps just on your managers in a particular area, and you can click on those different filters to see the data changing. So it's just that next level of granularity. What I'm also going to do now is show you a little bit more about the kind of data that you can see, because this is stuff that I think is really interesting to gather anyway, whether you're on the program or not. These are the kind of questions that people could be asking at their sites to get that insight into their culture. So one of the things that we can see here in the data is more a high level of benchmarking. So you can compare the data to industry, you can compare within the company, and you can also track yearly. So where you see those arrows, if they are red arrows facing downwards, they curve depending on how much lower they are. This is an indication of lower than. And if the score is higher, there is a green arrow that goes up. So it gives you a very quick visual on where you sit in relation to the industry. And if you have multiple sites and you look at one site, you can look at where you stand in relation to the company. So it's just that next level of detail and data. Another area that is quite useful to look at is actually more specifically, let's say you get a low score in strategy or you get a low score in rewards. You can then go and look at, well, which specific questions were the ones that caused me to have that lower score. So this is just a more specific look at the issues, and it can help to highlight the reasons. So why is it that we got that low score? There's two options for finding out. One is to go back and talk to people at the site, and the other is to dig down into the data. But of course, you can do both. Using the more granular level of data about what's happening in the company, what can be quite useful is this can generate more focused plans and targets. So instead of saying, I would like my reward score to go from 70 to 75, what you can do is look at the actual specific element. Let's say, as an example, promotions and rewards being allocated fairly, and you can just take action on that one element and set targets in relation to that one element. Other areas that we found actually very interesting to look at across the organizations are when I mentioned ranking and how we get people to rank the priorities at the company. And one of the things that we like to do is ask people to rank the priorities as individuals, and we also ask them to rank their priorities as an organization. So what this gives us is two very interesting pieces of information. The first is, what are the real priorities at that site or that department or at that level? The second is, what are the differences? And what you can see here on the screen is actually an aggregate of the first year of data that we had. So what you're looking at now is actually probably tens of thousands of people scoring themselves and scoring their company so that we can see what people are thinking of those that have already joined the program. What you can see is that food safety and health and safety come top, quality comes next, production speed next, and then price at the bottom. However, what you can also see is that we get our biggest variation between the individual and the company when we look at production speed. And I'm sure many of you are thinking, well, that's probably because it's one of the areas that's the most challenging to deal with when you've got people talking to you about safety requirements and quality requirements, and then you've got people talking to you about product needing to be out of the door because the customer's waiting, and those kind of varied and sometimes very high pressure production demands. But what's important here is the greater the difference between these red and yellow lines, the more you know that there's that conflict between the spoken and the unspoken. Sometimes it's a miscommunication, sometimes it's a practical issue. So again, even with this data, it's important to go back and investigate and speak to people and find out why this might be the case. Also, a really important area to look at, and again, whether you're on the program or not, these are questions you can ask. Where do people think the risks are coming from at their site? Is it physical, chemical, biological? And we know these are three areas that is discussed in a typical food safety training course, but are they talked about at the level where people really walk away from that understanding, in my job, at my site, this is what I need to focus on the most? Obviously, we need to care about all of them, but there are some things that are more important than others, and they're the things that can never be compromised. And what we've found over the time that we've been running this program, this has been the most varied in response. So we've seen a lot of disparity between the thoughts and feelings of individuals, even when they're in the same department at the same site. We've also seen a lot of disparity between managers, supervisors, and operators. So what we're getting back from this data analysis is that there's a lot of confusion and variation and misunderstanding, perhaps, on where the real risks are. Something I've noticed particularly is that where companies have recently done some training, whatever was the content of that training is often then what's considered as the top priority. So I think this is quite an interesting thing for you who do the training to consider, is that if you are doing a training course on allergens or chemical hazards or microbiology, bear in mind that the impression that you leave people with might be that that's the number one risk at the site, where it actually might not be. So it's always worth, in every training course, establishing almost the risk criteria, the risk rating of what you're talking about, and reaffirming the other messages of the other things that people need to be aware of so that they're not lost in that message. So what you get from this kind of data, you can see, is it appropriate what people think the level of risk is at our site from these different areas, and are people thinking the same, or are they thinking differently? So I've shown you some of the highlights of the kind of data that we think is very important to find out about. I hope from that it's given you some ideas about moving forward and how you can start to interrogate your safety and quality culture. But before we finish the webinar, I would very much like to hear the answers to the first question again. Now that I've talked through the 4 areas and I've talked through some of the things we look at, what's your opinion on how strong the food safety and quality culture is at your site? Do you think you have a strong food safety and quality culture? Yes, partly no, or I don't know.
Okay, yeah. You oppose I think it's a similar picture as previous, I think, Jo.
Okay.
Was we expecting it to go more into partly?
Usually what we find is we get less yeses and more partlies as we progress, and usually less on the I don't know when people have more of an understanding of what we're actually considering. So
yeah, I didn't write them down, but the shape of it does look very, very similar, the pattern, I think.
Okay, so basically then, the guys that are listening, you guys have that handle on what you think the food safety and quality culture is at your site. And for those of you that think yes, even where we've gone through all of these different areas, it's very positive that you're still coming out and thinking yes, because it really is a lot to get right when you're responsible for leading the food safety and quality culture in the food industry, in a food business. For those of you that are thinking partly, it might be that some of the areas that you're thinking about have changed, or it might be the same ones that you thought about before. And for those of you that are thinking no, I hope you've seen from this now some of the areas that you can work on to get away, to move from that no into a partly. And those of you that are thinking partly, to move from that partly to a yes. In all the time that we've worked with companies in food safety and quality culture, we've never found a perfect company. We've never found the company where everything was working brilliantly. And I think as part of my parting message, it would be to have a culture of excellence. It's about understanding really what that culture is and what it looks like. And it's having continual improvement plans. It's having a way of knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are and being committed to make them better. And if you're there, then I would say that's what we're talking about in relation to excellence. It's not perfection, but it's understanding and having a commitment to continually improving. And if you can track those improvements through a program such as this, if you can actually see that you're moving in the right direction, then it can have a really positive impact. So that's all from me now, but I just have a slide at the end with some contact details. So you can see that if you have any technical questions, you can come to myself if you have any questions about the theoretical content that we've covered. And if you have any questions specifically related to the BRC module, then you can see Neil Cool's contact details at the end, and you can reach him.
We're still on the poll slide, Jo.
Okay. Oh. Have some emails come up.
Yeah, got them.
Fantastic.
Okay, brilliant.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Okay, if you can stop your slide share now, John, we'll take the questions. It was excellent, that. Yeah, that, like you say, that furry, fuzzy thing called culture, you start to put it together and you can break it down into the 4 Ps, and then within the 4 Ps into the 16 elements, then you can really start digging in and understanding what culture is and how you're performing and where you need to improve and making plans. Yeah, all makes sense. Yes, very good.
Thank you. And amazingly, my 2 cats didn't start howling during the presentation, so I'm very happy.
I know, but I let the side down. Did you hear my phone ring? Yes.
Oh, no, not at all, don't worry.
All right, okay. Right, well, let's take some questions. We've got a few minutes. How can we get this online assessment, Catherine?
Okay, so if you are a BRC site, then you can contact Neil with the email address that I showed you. If you're not a BRC site, you can contact me and I can discuss with you, signpost to you the right direction to go in. That's probably the easiest thing to move forward with, the easiest way to move forward.
Crystalline, getting down to the brass tacks, does it have to be purchased?
Yes. Most things in life do, but I think you'll find that it's a very inexpensive module, especially the BRC voluntary module. What we've done is we've stripped out some of the extra services that come around it and some of the bells and whistles of the platform, and we've really provided something more minimal, which is very cost effective for companies to use. Okay,
Sheena, can you foresee a time when retailers will make the culture module within BRC a requirement of supplying them?
That's an interesting question, and it could potentially happen in the future. But right now, the priority for us is that we want to know which companies are doing this voluntarily. And that's why I think it's very important that the BRC module is voluntary. A lot of retailers are very interested in this kind of information, so I don't know what will happen over time. But certainly for us, the primary motivation of doing it should be that you are interested in your culture and you want that deeper understanding and that you're motivated to continually improve. And one of the things that we focus very much on when we look at the data, we recognize companies that show improvement. We don't look at the absolute score. So we're not going to say you've got 90, you've got 80. What we're looking at is the companies that use the information to drive change.
Yeah, that's the important thing. Casilda and Jennifer asking similar questions. What about SQF and other GFSI standards? Is it available through them or exclusive to BRC?
Yeah, the full program is available, but not the module that adds on to the audit. So that's exclusively available through BRC. But there is a potential to access the full program, but not that voluntary module that can be utilized as part of the audit process.
Okay, and the contact details are there, so if they need help, they can contact you. Andre, are there any companies in Brazil offering this service?
Brazil, at the moment, I don't think so. In the first year that the program has been operating, we started up very much in England, and we're now getting a lot more clients in America and Europe and Australia. We've also got a few in Canada and New Zealand, but the number of countries is growing all the time. It's available in Portuguese, so there is that certainly that potential for running it. And because it's an online program, essentially, it can be run globally. So if someone's interested, then please feel free to contact me and I can put you in touch with the right person.
Just a question from me then. Is it a self-assessment, I might have missed it, or is it that somebody comes in and audits against those criteria?
So the program itself is an online assessment where we provide an anonymous survey platform, and we have a minimum representative sample that we require within each company. We also require a minimum number of operators, supervisors, and managers. So it's very much a whole organizational survey. And the data that gets back, we then analyze it and look for patterns and trends. And we discuss with the organization what's going on at their site. So they have the insight into their organization. We get the insight into what everybody's thinking and feeling in relation to those dimensions and priorities and risks and everything. And then we work together to identify what's going on. With the BRC module, one of the reasons that's quite an exciting project is because the auditor, in addition to having the regular audit data and the culture data, the auditor's also taking observations of their own. So it provides this additional set of information, which we can look at all three of them together.
Yeah. Really, it needs to be in GFSI standards and be a requirement for the most senior management to drive it, really, doesn't it, probably?
That'd be nice. GFSI, actually, they do have a culture group, and culture is a really important topic. And it's I'm part of a scientific committee, and we provide input as well to the GFSI group. But there is a group, and it's made up of largely industry, and many of the standards bodies as well are part of that group. And I think that over time, we'll see a lot of work coming out of that group as well in culture. Yeah. So watch this space, really, I think, the GFSI stuff.
I think Britta Ball, one of the presenters on here, is actually in that. Yes. Diane, what are the green, amber and red on the risk slide?
Oh, okay. So the green is low, the amber is medium, and the red is high. So when you look at the page, you get a very quick visual in relation to if you see lots of red, then you know that people perceive it to be a high risk at the site. And if you see lots of green, they're perceiving it to be a lower risk at the site. Okay.
I think, Joe, we've run over the hour. We've gone a few minutes over, and I am very conscious that, you know, people have committed an hour. So I think, have we missed any? Just maybe take one more. What is the biggest, to end on, Tammy, what is the biggest challenge when introducing a new culture to a company? A new culture.
Biggest challenge. I think the biggest challenge is that culture is, so much of it's not easily visible to us, and it incorporates so many different dimensions that it's very hard to shift it. And I think that what people have to remember and bear in mind is that if you're wanting to change culture and you have an understanding of a few key things that you think might be negatively affecting that culture, then taking those few small things and getting a very comprehensive set of plans around changing them is more important than trying to change 10 or 12 or 15 things. Culture change is slow, and it needs to have this continual effort applied to it. But when you do get the changes and you maintain them, they also have this great knock-on effect. So although it can sometimes feel a bit frustrating, people think I wanted to change everything and it's made only a small difference. When you start to make those small changes, you'll see them knocking into other areas as well. And that can be really rewarding. So I think the scale and complexity of it is the biggest challenge, really.
But get going and the snowball will grow bigger, yeah, as it rolls down. Okay, fantastic. On that note, Joe, we'll end there. But thanks very much on behalf of myself, the IFSQN and all the attendees and people who see this recording as well. I hope you'll come back again in the future.
Bye, everyone. Thanks very much, Simon.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, ladies and gents. Right, your certificate's loaded in the sidebar. We will follow up with an email with the certificate of attendance if you don't get it now, with the slides, with the recording. It's Friday. Happy Friday. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend, and come back refreshed to change the culture in your organization positively. Okay. Thanks, ladies and gents. Bye now.